Good morning and welcome to Chapter 3 of our Introduction to Economics. Today we will discuss demand, supply and market equilibrium. We will look at it through a number of paragraphs. First of all, take a definition of firms and households, which are the basic decision-making units. Then we look into the input and output market and what the circular flow means. Then we'll explore the whole issue of demand and supply, try to establish what is the market equilibrium, and look into some more issues and some more problematics about demand and supply in product markets. Then we look ahead at the market and allocation of resources. But first of all, let's start with a few definitions. A firm is an organization that transforms resources, inputs, into products, outputs. Firms are the primary producing units in a market economy. An entrepreneur is a person who organizes, manages and assumes the risk of a firm, taking a new idea or a new product and turning it into a successful business. The households are the consuming units in an economy. They are basically the families, the most single individual unit within the economical context. The product or output markets, the markets in which the goods and services are exchanged. The inputs or the factor markets are the markets in which the resources which are used to produce the products are exchanged. Let's look now at the circular flow. What is the circular flow? It is actually very simple. If you put the firms and the households next to each other, you can see that the firms supply goods and services which are consumed and therefore demanded by households. The other way around, the firms, to make the products, require labor, capital, money and land. And these three input factors are supplied by the households. So the households supply the labor and the money to the companies. The company makes the product and supply the goods to the households. And versus around this circle of factors and goods, there is obviously a circle of money. When the products are supplied to the households pay for the products. And when the households supply their work and their capital to the companies reward them by payment. So the flow of goods and services and of production factors is the inverse flow of the payment. The labor market is the input or factor market in which household supplies work in exchange for wages that they receive from firms, and the work that they produce to the firms help the firms produce the product. The capital market is the input or factor market in which household supplies their savings for interest and for future claims on profit. And that capital is supplied to the firms that need this money to invest and to buy capital goods like land, property, machines to make the business grow. The land market is the input or factor market in which the household supply land and other real property in exchange for rent. And the factors of production are the inputs into the production process, and they are combining land, labor and capital. These are the three factors that go into the production, which are input in the companies and out of which companies make product. So input and labor markets are connected through the behavior of firms and households. The firms determine the quantities and characters of the product that they want to output, that they want to produce, and the quantities. The households, of course, determine what are the products they want to buy and at what price and what quantity they want to buy. So both firms and households are interacting in deciding what gets produced, to which extent, to which degree, and what gets purchased, and to which quantity. A household's decision about what quantity of particular output or a product it wishes to demand or to buy is determined by a certain number of factors. The price of the product is of course a primary component in the decision, but there are other factors such as the income available to the household, the household's amount of accumulated wealth, the price of the other products available to the household. If it can buy another product instead of the one it is considering first, then it obviously has an impact on the decision to buy or not to buy the first product. The household's tastes and preferences are obviously playing a role. You only buy what you like. And the household's expectation about future income, wealth and prices. We're going to explore all of these things one by one. But before we go into that, it is important to note the difference between quantity demanded and the other elements, which we will see later. The quantity demanded is the amount, that means the number of units. It's a question of volume. The amount or the volume of product that a household would buy in a given period if it could buy all it wanted at the current market price. It is important to distinguish between quantity demanded versus change in demand. The most important relationship in individual markets is the relationship between the market price and the quantity demanded. Changes in the price of a product affect the quantity demanded per period. Changes in other factors such as income or preference affect demand. As an example, we can say that an increase in the price of Coca-Cola is likely to decrease the quantity of Coca-Cola demanded. But we can also say that an increase in the overall welfare of this population is going to increase the demand for Coca-Cola as a whole. We're going to explore these concepts a little bit further. A demand schedule is a table showing how much of a given product the households would be willing to buy at different price. And out of the demand schedule, which is a list of numbers, we can draw the very fundamental demand curve. The demand curve is simply a graph that illustrates how much of a given product the households would be willing to buy at different prices. Let's see that example, which will depict Anna's demand curve. Anna, a person, would be willing, for instance, to pay or to demand 3 telephone calls if the telephone call was costing $7. But if the telephone call was costing $15, she would not consume any one. If a telephone call was costing $10, she would consume one. On the other hand, if the telephone call was 50 cents, she would demand 25 telephone calls. And we can plot these numbers here along the curve, and we obtain here the demand curve. So as you can see here, for $15 a call, she doesn't call at all. When calls are free, she goes up to 30 calls a month. And anything in between, as the price of the phone call decreases here, you can see the quantity increasing. The demand slope, the demand curve has a negative slope. The more the price decreases, the more the quantity increases, or vice versa. The more the price increases, the more the quantity demanded decreases. It is relatively obvious. The most expensive a product is, the less demand there is for it, or the less people will want to buy it. So the demand curve slopes downward, and that is the law of demand, which is characterized by the negative relationship between the price and quantity demanded. As prices rise, quantity demanded decreases. As prices fall, quantity demanded increases. And it's reasonable, indeed, to expect quantity demanded to fall when the price rises. Ceteris paribus, that means if everything else remains the same. If everything else remains the same, a price increase reduces your likelihood to buy that product, and vice versa. There are other properties of the demand of curves. First of all, it is remarkable to see, or we need to pay attention on how the curve crosses the x-axis and the y-axis. As long as households have limited resources and wealth, there is a moment when the price becomes too expensive, they will not buy anything. As we have seen, Anna, at $15 a call, she doesn't make any phone call. So the demand curve will go and intersect the y-x, the vertical x, the price x. When the price is too high, there is no demand at all. And it is also obvious that even when the price is zero, there is only so much you can consume. So the demand curve will also cross the x-axis, the quantity axis at some point. So the curve is negative sloping and cross the price axis and cross the quantity axis. So what do we know about the shape of the demand curve? It has a negative slope. An increase in price is likely to lead to a decrease in quantity demanded, and a decrease in price is likely to lead in an increase in the quantity demanded. They intersect on the quantity axis as a result of time limitation and diminishing marginal utility, which means basically there is, again, only so much you can consume. And they also intersect at the price axis because there is a point at which you cannot afford the product anymore. There are other determinants in the household's demand. As we have seen, the price is the primary factor, but there are other elements that play a role. Income and wealth. Income is the sum of all the household's wages, salaries, profit, interest payment, rents, any other form of earnings that the households can generate within a given period of time. It's a flow measure. That's everything that comes in as revenue during that period of time. Wealth or net worth is the total value of what a household owns and diminished by what it owes. That would be, for instance, the value of all the money that it has, but also the value of the house that the household owns, minus the amount of money that the household owes to the bank due to the loan that it has taken from the bank. Other determinants of household demands pertain to the nature of goods. You have normal goods, which are goods for which demand goes up when higher income is higher, and demand goes down when income is lower. And you have inferior goods, for which demands tend to fall when income rises, which have, in fact, the opposite behavior than normal goods. You have then substitutes, which are goods that can serve as a replacement for another good. When the price of one increases, the demand for the other increases as well. Perfect substitutes are absolutely identical products, and complement or complementary goods are goods that go together, and whereby a decrease in the price of one product will result in an increase in demand for the other, and vice versa. We will see examples in the coming slides. Tastes and preferences, as we said, have an influence on demand, but they are, of course, much more difficult to quantify, and they are also volatile. They are volatile because tastes change over time, and they are idiosyncratic. Idiosyncratic means they vary from person to person, and they are therefore much more difficult to put in an economic law. Finally, expectations are the last element that influence demand. What you decide to buy today certainly depends on today's price and your current income and wealth, but there are also elements of the future that will influence your decision. It is important to understand that demand depends more on just current income, prices and taste. It will also depend on what you hope to get in the future. If you think that you will obtain a salary increase, you will be intent to spend more today because you expect to become more wealthy in the future. Let's see now what is the difference between the shift along the curve and a shift of demand curve. We can see the same table here as we saw before. Anna's demand for phone calls. You can see that this blue line was the original demand curve of Anna, and we so that as the price of phone calls decrease, the quantity demanded increases. But there can be another impact that changes Anna's behavior. That can be the fact that there is a change in the other factors other than the price. And let's say Anna has become now more wealthy. She has obtained a salary increase, her income has gone up, and now for the same prices she is inclined to consume more. And we can see here that now, whereas in the past for $7 she would only afford 3 calls, now for $7 she affords 12 calls. And for $15 she used to abstain from calling altogether. Now at $15 she can still afford 2 calls. Now we can see here that the demand curve has shifted to the right because of other factors than the price alone impacting the behavior of the consumers. A shift of a demand curve is a change that takes place in a demand curve corresponding to a new relationship between the quantity demanded of a good and the price of the good. The shift is brought about by change in the original condition, which is different from movement along the curve, which are simply the changes of quantity demanded brought about by a change in price. Another way of expressing that is to say that the change in price of a good or services leads to a change in the quantity demanded, and that's a movement along the curve demand. Or a change in income, preferences, or prices of other goods and services leads to change in the demand, and that's a shift of the demand curve. So again, very important distinction here. Movement along the demand curve itself are caused by changes in price. Shift of the demand curve are caused by other elements than the price. Income, behavior of other goods, preferences, and so on. Example, when income rises, the demand for hamburgers per month declines. That is a shift of the demand curve. And at the same time, the demand for steak, which is a better quality of meat, the demand for steak increases. People will go and consume better products because their income has risen. That is a shift in the demand curve. If, on the other hand, the price of hamburgers rises, what happens? The quantity demanded will decline. People will consume 10 hamburgers per month if they cost $1.50. They will only consume 5 if the price of hamburgers go to $3. As the price of hamburgers rises and people consume less hamburgers, what will happen? We will see that there will be an increased demand for chicken. People will consume less meat and will consume chicken. And at the same time, so the substitute goods will see their demand shift to the right, and we will also see at that time that the demand of the complementary goods to hamburgers, which is ketchup, for instance, the demand for ketchup will diminish because people consume less hamburgers. So a price increase in hamburgers will lead to a decline of the quantity of hamburgers demanded and will lead to a shift in the demand curve to the left. That means a lesser demand for complementary goods such as ketchup. Once we have established what the demand is for a household, we can establish the demand for the market. The market demand is simply the sum of all the quantities of the goods and services demanded per period by all the households buying in the market for that good and services. It's simply the cumulative demand of all the households. The aggregate or market demand curve is easily constructed. Let's take 3 households, A, B, C. You can see that A consumes, for instance, 8 pounds of coffee per month when it costs $1.50, but if the price moves to $3.50, it consumes 4. Household B, which has obviously less means, is less rich consumes £3 of coffee when it costs £3.50, but when the price moves up to £3.50, it consumes 0. And household C has actually more means than B and A. When the cost of £1 of coffee is £1.50, it consumes 9. When the price moves up to £3.50, it consumes 4, actually a bit the same as household A. So A and C have different consumption patterns. Aggregating these three curves together, we can construct the aggregate demand curve, and you can see here how it is constructed. When the price is £3.50, what is the demand? We have 4, 0 and 4, so a total demand of 8. What is the demand when the price is £1.50? It is 8, 3 and 9, which is 20, and out of these 2 points we can then draw the aggregated or market demand curve. Let's move now to the supply. Successful firms make profit because they are able to sell products for more than what it costs them to produce that product. And the profit is obviously the difference between the revenues generated from the sale of the product and the costs. The law of supply, just like we have the law of demand, we have a law of supply. And how does it work? The quantity supplied, first of all, we need to understand what that is. That is the amount of a particular product that a firm would be willing and able to offer for sale at a particular price given a certain period of time. The supply schedule would be a table, just like we have the demand schedule, we would have the supply schedule, which would be a table showing for that given price how much the firm would be willing to provide or to supply in terms of quantity of product. And out of that schedule, we would be able to draw the supply curve. The law of supply is a positive relationship between price and quantity of product supplied. An increase in market price will lead to an increase in quantity supply, and a decrease in market price will lead to a decrease in quantity supply. The supply curve, which is the graph illustrating that relationship, will make it very clear. See that example. We are looking here at the price of soybeans per bushel. When the price of soybean is $150 a bushel, producers of soybean have no interest to supplying it because it's too cheap. When the price of soybean increases, so is the willingness of the firms or the farmers to produce and to offer soybean. When soybean price moves to 5, farmers are very keen to produce soybean because they produce it probably for less and they can make a profit. So you can see that we have here that positive slope, the inverse relationship that one we had for the demand. When the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up. When the price reduces, the quantity supplied decreases. Here, again, at 150, no supply. At 225, farmers are willing to supply 20,000. If the price goes up to 4 or 5, they are willing to supply up to 45,000 tons of bushel. There are, of course, other determinants to the law of supply, just like there were for the law of demand. The cost of production. In order for a firm to make a profit, its revenue must exceed the cost. So the cost of production will have to be controlled, and it depends on a number of factors, like technologies and the price and quantities of the input needed by the firm, like the labor, the land, the capital, the energy, the raw material necessary for the production, and so on and so on. The price of related products will be the third element determining the supply curve. The first one is the price of the good or service itself. The cost of producing the product is the second element. The price of the related products is the third element that influences the supply curve. Just like we had for the demand curve, we have here the same way in which the supply can change. We have to distinguish between the movement along the supply curve, which is the supply in the quantity supplied brought about by a change in price. This is what we saw in the first chart. When the price of soybean increases, the quantity supplied increases because farmers are more willing to sell at that high price. And when the price decreases, the quantity offered decreases because farmers are not willing to sell at too low a price. The shift of the supply curve is another element influencing the supply, but that change will take place when an element other than the price will influence the supply. And this shift can be brought about by a change in the original condition in the way the product is produced. For example, here we have the original supply curve, which we discussed earlier, but suppose there was a new strain, a new type of seeds for soybean, which would become more efficient and which would in fact lower the price of production for farmers, or which would produce more soybean per hectare, then the quantity supplied, the supply curve would change. Farmers would be willing maybe to supply the new type of soybean at $150, and at that price they would be ready to supply 5,000 tons, whereas in the past with the old type of soybean it would have become too expensive for them to supply it at that price, and they would not have done it. And you can see here that with the new soybean they are willing to supply more quantity. This is a shift to the right of the supply curve. So just like in the demand curve, it is important to distinguish between movements along the curve and shifts in the supply curve. A change in price of a good or service leads to a change in the quantity supplied. It's a movement along the curve. A change in income, preferences or prices of other goods and services leads to a change in the supply that leads to a change or a shift in the supply curve. Just like we did for demand, we can construct the aggregate or the market supply. That's the sum of all the supply curve of all the participating firms in the economy. We have here that example where firm A, B, C have all different supply curves. By aggregating them in the same way as what we did for the demand, we can construct an aggregated or a market supply curve. Here, to take an example, at $3 a bushel, the quantity supplied by A is 30,000, by B is 10,000, and by C is 25,000 total. The economy produces 65,000. The market equilibrium is simply the phase where the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded are equal. At equilibrium, there is no tendency for the price to change because there is equal quantity of product demanded and equal quantity of product supplied. From equilibrium, we can move to a situation of what is called excess demand or shortage. A shortage is a condition that exists when quantity demanded exceeds the quantity offered. That's where shortage is taking place. Excess demand shows here that at a price of $1.75 per bushel, the quantity offered is 25,000, but the quantity demanded is 50,000. So there is a shortage here, or an excess demand, of 25,000. Consequently, the price will go up to that level of $250 to compensate for the shortage and find a new equilibrium point. When the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied, price tends to rise. When the price in the market rises, the quantity demanded falls and the quantity supplied rises until an equilibrium is reached, at which the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are equal. Excess supply is the opposite position, whereby the condition is that the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded at the current price. There is a surplus. Example, in that chart, we can see here that at a price of $3, the quantity offered for bushel of soybeans is 40,000. But at that price, there is only demand for 20,000. There is a supply excess or a surplus of bushels on the market of 20,000 pieces. And to find an equilibrium, the market will adjust the price, and the price will go down to 250, whereby the demand meets the supply and the quantity demanded equals the quantity offered. The new price at 250 ensures that the market is in equilibrium. Changes in equilibrium can happen when supply and demand curves shift. Then the equilibrium in price and between price and quantity changes. Let's see here an example where in the coffee market, the ship of supply, which is that red line here, due for instance to a freeze in the coffee producing countries, whereby the production of coffee would be reduced, sees that there is a shift to the left of the supply curve. There is less coffee offered, and you can see that from the initial equilibrium at 120, because there is now less coffee offered and the curve of supply has shifted left, there is a shortage here of 13.2 minus 6.6 billion pounds of coffee per year. All of this quantity is not supplied, then the price has to go up from 120 to 240 for the market to find its new equilibrium. So a shift to the left of the supply curve has disrupted the equilibrium, and the new equilibrium finds its place at 240. The price increases. This slide shows how demand shifts and supply shifts can take place and disrupt the equilibrium. First example here, an increase in income will boost the demand for product X, shift the demand curve to the right, and at the same time shift the demand curve to the left, reduce the demand for a product that is inferior to product X. If there is a decrease in income, the demand for product X will move to the left, less demand, but the product for the inferior good will go up, shift of the curve to the right. At the same time, there will also be an increase for the substitute of X. If you can't afford the real product, you will find a substitute which is cheaper, and the demand for that substitute will increase. If there is an increase in the price of complement for product X, then the demand will shift to the left. A decrease in the price of substitute for X will lead to a demand shifting to the left, but the decrease in the price of a complement for X will lead to an increase of the curve to the right, an increase in demand. An increase in the cost of production of X will move the supply to the left. There will be less supply. A decrease in the cost of production will increase the supply. Firms will be able to produce more and bring more on the market. That will lower the price eventually to find a new equilibrium. Another practical example, orange juice prices could skyrocket after freeze destroyed most of California's output. When crops become scarce because of bad weather, the quantity supplied will be less. The shift of the supply curve takes place to the left. There is less supply. The price goes up to find a new equilibrium. So, to summarize, here are the important points to remember about the mechanics of supply and demand. A demand curve shows how much a product of a household would buy if it could buy all it wanted at a given price. A supply curve shows how much of a product a firm would supply if it could sell all it wanted. Quantity demanded and quantity supplied are always per time period, per day, per month, per year. The demand for a good is determined by price, household income and wealth, prices of other products and services, tastes and preferences, and expectations. The supply of good is determined by price, costs of production, and price of related products. The costs of production are determined by available technologies of production and input price of the labor factor, land factor, and capital factor. It is important to distinguish between movements along the supply and demand curves and shifts of these curves. When the price of a good changes, the movement or the quantity of goods demanded or supplied moves along the curve. When the other factor changes, other factors than the price changes, the curve shifts left when there is less, right when there is more. And the market equilibrium exists only when quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded at the current price. And looking ahead, with these concepts of the law and demand and supply interacting, you can already see how market answers to the three basic economic questions which we asked in the first session. What is produced, how is it produced, and who gets what is produced. The demand curve reflects what people are willing and able to pay for products, what they want to buy. It is influenced by income, wealth, preferences, price of other goods, and expectations. Firms make a profit only if the price of a good that they sell is above their production price. So lower costs mean higher profits. When a good is in short supply, its price rises. As it does, those who are willing to pay and able to continue buying do so. The others stops buying, of course. This last slide shows a review of the main terms we have explored during that session. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.